The air on the South Plains tasted like hot iron and dust. Grasshoppers clicked in grass so dry it had gone from brown to gray, and the light at noon was not yellow but white, a flat, hammering brightness that made shadows disappear and left nothing on the ground but glare and heat. A man knelt beside a dark cabin, pressing his palm against the south wall. He held it there for 1 second and pulled it away. A girl stood behind him in the doorway, holding a cracked tin cup against her brother's mouth. Neither child went inside. Inside was hotter than out. The freight wagon left Malin Reed Vickery standing in dust so fine it coated his teeth before he could close his mouth. Clara held Ned's hand. Ned held a cracked tin cup. 2 trunks sat in the dirt beside a warped handsaw, and inside a spelling book in Malin's coat pocket, $17.60 were folded into a page marked with his dead brother's thumbprint. Abel's claim looked like something a man had started and then stopped caring about. 14 by 18 feet of dark cottonwood posts and cedar beams hauled from a canyon draw, roofed with rough planks, tarred canvas patches, and sawed edges that had already begun to slide. The door hung on rope hinges. One window opening faced south with no shutter. The whole structure sat on open ground with nothing between it and the horizon in any direction. No tree, no rise, no shade of any kind. It was the 29th of May, 1885. The sun was still 2 hours from its worst, and the air inside the cabin was already hotter than the air outside. Malin set his palm against the south wall. He pulled it back. The dark wood had been baking since morning, and the heat it held was not surface heat. It went deep into the grain, stored there, radiating inward. He could feel it pulsing off the wall from 2 feet away. The roof was worse. Tarred canvas absorbed everything the sun threw at it, and the rough planks underneath held that heat like a cast iron lid on a Dutch oven. By 3 in the afternoon, the cabin would not cool. It would cook. Clara looked at the doorway. She did not go in. "Is this where Papa lived?" she asked. Malin did not answer her directly. He walked around the cabin's perimeter, counting what Abel had left. 1 mule with a saddle sore the size of a silver dollar, picketed on a frayed line. 2 water barrels that held 30 gallons each, both less than half full. A shovel with a cracked handle. A coil of wire. 6 pounds of cornmeal in a tin that had not been sealed properly, so weevils had gotten into the bottom third. A bed frame with no mattress. A rusted cook stove with 1 working burner. He counted it all because counting was the only thing he could do that felt like work. The numbers did not help. The nearest reliable water was a shared well 14 miles away in Estacado. 1 round trip with the mule took the better part of 2 days if nothing went wrong, and something always went wrong. A man alone could make the trip every 4 days and survive on careful rationing. A man with 2 children could not ration the same way. Children drank more than they thought they did, and they could not be told to stop when their lips cracked and their noses bled. A deeper well on the property would cost more than $140. Malin had $17.60. A dugout, the standard answer to plains heat, would mean digging into the caliche hardpan beneath the cabin. Malin had no blasting powder, no auger, no second pair of hands, and no time to spend weeks underground while Clara and Ned cooked above. He was not a farmer. He was not a cattleman. He was not any of the things a man needed to be to survive on the Llano Estacado in the 2nd year of a drought that had already broken better men than him. In Indiana, he had mixed plaster and carried hods for his uncle's crew. He knew how to spread a wall smooth. He knew the smell of wet lime and the way it bit skin if you let it sit too long. He did not know how to dig a well or plow hardpan or keep cattle alive on brown grass. But Abel was dead. Abel had died hauling water in April, collapsed beside the wagon with the mule standing over him and the barrels still empty. A freighter found him 2 days later, and Abel's children had no one except an uncle who had never raised anything but plaster dust. Ned tugged Clara's hand and pointed at a horned lizard frozen on a flat rock near the cabin's east wall. "It's sitting in the shade," Ned said. There was no shade. The lizard was pressed against the pale caliche soil where the ground reflected light instead of drinking it. Malin noticed. He filed it away without knowing why. Isaac Pancoast arrived on the second morning. He rode a gray mare that looked too well fed for the country, and he wore a broad hat with a straight brim that made his face a vertical line of shadow. He was 61 years old, a Quaker elder who had been on the South Plains longer than most, and he carried the authority of a man who had buried neighbors who did not listen to him. He did not dismount immediately. He sat the mare and looked at the cabin, the mule, the barrels, the children sitting on a trunk in the only patch of morning shade the cabin threw, and the man on his knees beside a cook stove trying to boil cornmeal mush with water he could not afford to waste on cooking. "You are Abel's brother," Pancoast said. It was not a question. Malon stood. "I am." Pancoast dismounted then. He walked the perimeter the way Mahlan had walked it the day before, but slower, and with the eye of a man who had inspected dozens of failing claims. He touched the south wall and held his hand there longer than Mahlan expected. He looked at the roof seams where tar had softened and bubbled. He kicked one of the sawed edges that had slid to the ground. He bent and looked at the underside of the floor where there was no floor, just packed dirt that radiated heat upward into the single room. He counted the water barrels. He looked at the mule's saddle, sore. He opened the cornmeal tin, saw the weevils, and closed it. Then he faced Malin. "You have no shade," Pancoast said. "You have no well. You have a house that drinks sun like a man drinks whiskey. It takes it all in and gives nothing back. A man alone could gamble with that. Children cannot." "I am not gambling," Malin said. "Then what do you call standing on $96 of store debt with $17 in your pocket, 2 children you cannot feed, 1 lame mule, and a cabin that will be hotter than a stove lid by July?" Malin did not ask how Pancoast knew the debt figure. On the South Plains, Ransom Peel's store ledger was as public as the weather. "My brother's children have nowhere else," Malin said. "They have the town. There are families in Estacado who would take them." "Together?" Pancoast did not answer immediately, and that pause told Malin everything. An 11-year-old girl was useful. She could cook, mend, carry water, mind younger children. A 6-year-old boy was a mouth. No family on the drought-stripped plains would volunteer for both. "I will not separate them," Malin said. Pancoast put his hat back on. "Then you will bury them together. This land does not care about your intentions. It cares about water, shade, and whether your roof will kill you before the sun does." He mounted and left without offering help. His mare's hooves kicked up dust that hung in the still air for a full minute after he disappeared. Clara had heard every word. She stood at the cabin door with her hand on the frame, and when Malin looked at her, she said, "He thinks we are going to die." "He thinks we are going to leave," Malin said. "Are we?" Malin looked at the cabin. The south wall was already too hot to touch, and it was not yet noon. "No," he said, but the word felt thin. Ransom Peel came on the 3rd day, and he brought paper. He wrote a sorrel gelding that was better cared for than anything on Malan's claim, and he wore a vest with watch chain even in the heat because Ransom Peel believed a man's appearance was his credit rating made visible. He was 46, thick through the shoulders, and he smiled the way a man smiles when he knows the number on the page before he shows it. He did not dismount. He leaned from the saddle and held out a folded sheet. Your brother's account, Peel said. $96.14. Store credit extended against the claim improvements and one mule. Terms were 60 days from last purchase, which was March 12th. That makes it past due. Malin took the paper. The handwriting was neat, columns ruled in pencil, every item listed: cornmeal, salt, nails, rope, canvas, a water barrel, axle grease, a tin plate set. Abel had bought the things a man buys when he believes he's building a life. The total at the bottom was circled twice. If you intend to stay, Peel said, the debt transfers. If you leave, I take the improvements, the wagon boards, and the mule. Either way, the account squares. Clara stood behind Malin with Ned pressed against her hip. The heat was working on all of them. Ned's lips were already splitting at the corners, and Clara's nose had started bleeding that morning for no reason except dry air and sun. I intend to stay, Malin said. Then you intend to pay. I intend to survive first and pay second. Peel's smile did not change. That is what your brother said. Exact words near enough. He intended to survive. He intended to pay. He intended to dig a well. He intended to make the claim prove out. Peel gathered his reins. Intentions do not cool a house, Vickery. Intentions do not dig wells, and the debt does not wait for your intentions to catch up. He turned the sorrel and stopped. One more thing. If those children show signs of heat sickness, vomiting, confusion, seizure, Isaac Pancoast has the authority to remove them for their safety. A man's claim to his brother's children is not stronger than those children's lives. He rode north toward Estacado. The dust he raised was the same dust Pancoast had raised on the same road, settling on the same cracked ground. Malin watched it drift and did the math one more time. $96 owed, $17 held. One mule that could not be sold because it was collateral. No well, no shade, no help coming. And a cabin that stored the sun's heat inside its walls and poured it back onto sleeping children after dark. He could not leave because the debt followed him and the children would be separated. He could not stay because the cabin was killing them by degrees. He could not dig a dugout, could not afford a well, could not build shade from materials he did not have. Clara tugged his sleeve. Uncle Malin, why do you keep looking at the wall? He had not realized he was doing it, but she was right. His eyes kept returning to the south wall, the dark, heat-soaked planks that radiated warmth inward like a banked fire. He was staring at them the way a plasterer stares at a surface that needs finishing, not with despair, with the beginning of a question. The idea did not arrive whole. It arrived the way most ideas arrive on the frontier, in pieces over days connected by a mind too stubborn to stop thinking. The first piece was Ned. On the fourth morning, Malin found the boy sitting on the north side of the cabin, pressed against a flour sack that had been left on the ground. The sack was pale, almost white, and the dirt beneath it was cooler than the surrounding ground. Not cool, cooler. Enough that a 6-year-old whose feet burned on every other surface had found it and claimed it. Maslon crouched beside him. He pressed his palm to the dark ground 3 feet from the sack, then to the ground beneath the sack's edge. The difference was small, but real. The second piece was memory. His mother's kitchen in Putnam County, Indiana. Summer of 68 or 69, he could not remember which. The kitchen wall behind the stove had gone black with soot and grease over years of cooking. His mother had mixed lime and water and brushed the wall white in a single afternoon. He remembered the smell, wet chalk and something sour, like milk left out. He remembered the brush strokes leaving ridges. He remembered what she did after. She pressed his palm to the black side of the wall where the stove's heat still radiated from the morning fire. Then she pressed his palm to the white side. The lime was cool, not cold, but the heat did not push back the same way. She said something about light and dark that he did not remember exactly, but the feeling in his palms he remembered with perfect clarity. Black drinks, white throws away. The third piece was observation. He took a cedar offcut from Abel's scrap pile, dark, weathered, rough grain. He cut it into 3 pieces, each the size of his hand. One he left dark, one he rubbed with flour until it was pale and powdery. One he coated with crushed chalk he scraped from a dry streak near the playa edge, mixed with a little water into a paste. He set all 3 in full sun on a flat rock at noon. Clara watched. She had not been asked to participate, but she positioned herself beside the boards and waited without speaking. Ned wandered over when his sister did not move. After 1 hour, Malin told Clara to touch each board. She touched the dark board and pulled her hand away fast. She touched the flower board, which was warm but tolerable. She touched the chalk board, which was cooler still, though the white coating was already cracking and lifting at the edges. "The dark one hurts," she said. "The white ones do not." "But the white stuff is falling off." She had identified the problem before Malin could form the words for it. Color was not enough. The coating had to stick. It had to survive wind that stripped paint off fence posts and sun that blistered tar. It had to bind to rough wood and stay bound through dust storms and temperature swings that cracked iron. What he needed was limewash. Real limewash. Burned limestone slaked into putty, mixed with binders, applied in thin coats that bonded to the surface and hardened into a mineral shell. He had watched his uncle's crew whitewash cellar walls in Indiana. He knew the general shape of the thing. But general shapes did not help when the nearest commercial lime cost more than he had, and the nearest kiln was somewhere he had never been. Celia Ann Bostwick saw the boards. She was passing on foot after closing the one-room school in Estacado, walking the road that ran within a quarter-mile of Abel's claim because it was the shortest path to the rooming house where she boarded. She was 30 years old, precise in her speech, and she noticed things the way a teacher notices things. She cataloged them. "Those boards were in the sun?" she asked, stopping at the fence line. "Since noon," Clara said. Clara answered before Malin could, and she answered with data, the time, the duration, the materials on each board. Celia looked at the girl, and then at the boards, and then at Mahalon, who was crouched beside them with chalk dust on his knees. "The chalk one stayed cooler," Celia said. "It did. But it is already flaking. That is the problem." Celia touched each board herself, pressing her fingers flat the way a person does when they want to measure, not just feel. "What would hold it?" "Lime," Malin said. "Burned lime, slaked and mixed with salt water. Maybe milk for a binder." "Where does a man find lime on the llano?" Malin looked south, toward the playa basins, where pale crust showed in dry weather, chalky caliche deposits, calcium-rich nodules scattered in the flats where water had evaporated and left mineral behind. He had seen Orville Keck's cattle avoid those bitter stretches. He had not thought about why until now. "I think it is sitting on the ground," he said. Celia looked at him for a long moment. She did not say it would work. She did not say it was foolish. She said, "Measure everything. I will want to see the numbers." She walked on. Malin watched her go and realized she was the first person on the South Plains who had not told him to leave. Orville Keck found Malin loading caliche nodules into a sack near the playa edge 2 days later. Orville was 29, built like a fence post, narrow, hard, and set firmly in the ground. He ran a small operation on the next claim south, freighting on the side to make his payments, and he had the particular skepticism of a man who had survived by never trying anything new. He stood beside his wagon and watched Malon crack pale rocks with the back of a hand axe, sorting the whitest pieces into a grain sack. "You're digging chalk," Orville said. "Caliche. Some of it has limestone in the nodules." "For what purpose?" Malin explained. He kept it simple because simple was all he had. Dark walls store heat, white walls throw it back, limewash sticks where chalk does not. He showed Orville the test boards, which Clara had labeled with her school slate pencil. Dark, flour, chalk. He explained that he intended to burn the calcium-rich nodules in a pit, slake the powder, mix it with salt and milk, and coat the cabin. Orville listened without interrupting. That was Orville's way. He took information in before he pushed back. When Malin finished, Orville looked at the cabin, which sat on the open ground with its dark walls shimmering in afternoon heat, and he said the thing that Malin had been telling himself at 3 a.m. when doubt was loudest. "You're trying to cool a stove by painting it. I am trying to keep the stove from heating up in the first place. White powder will wash off in the first blow. You have seen what wind does to whitewash on fence rails. 3 days, and it is bare wood again. Fence rail whitewash is chalk and water. Limewash is different. It carbonates. It becomes part of the surface." Orville shook his head slowly. "Malin, I'm not a man who tells other men what to do, but you have $96 in debt, 2 children, 1 mule, and no well. You're spending your time hauling rocks from a playa to make paint. If that time went to digging, you might hit water. At what depth? 40 feet, 60, alone. Deeper than you will get painting a roof." The logic was reasonable. That was what made Orville dangerous as a skeptic. He was not cruel, not hostile, just sensible. And sensible men on the plains had a way of being right about everything except the one thing that mattered. "The roof is the problem," Malin said. "Not the only problem, but the one I can change with what I have. If I can drop the inside temperature by even 10 degrees, the children can sleep. If they can sleep, they can function. If they can function, we can haul water, manage the mule, work the claim. Everything starts with the roof." Orville spat into the dust. "And if your paint blows off, then I paint it again." "With what time?" Malin did not answer because the answer was, "The same time I am spending now, arguing with you." He loaded another nodule into the sack. It was heavy, pale, and it left white dust on his palms. Orville climbed back onto his wagon seat. "I will say this. Your brother was a better man than most out here, and he could not make that claim prove out. You are not your brother. You are a plasterer from Indiana who has been on the plains for 1 week. The land does not grade on effort." He drove south. Malin watched him go and felt the doubt Orville had planted settle into his chest like dust into water. It did not dissolve. It just sank and waited. But he kept loading rocks. Sahas, the first confrontation with the town, happened at Peel's store. Malin rode the mule 14 miles to Estacado because he needed salt, not food, not tools, not comfort. Salt, 3 pounds of it, to make the brine that would slow the limewash from drying too fast and cracking off the wood. Ransom Peel's store was the center of Estacado, in the way that a drain is the center of a basin. Everything flowed toward it because there was nowhere else to go. It was dark inside, which made it cooler, and men lingered at the counter the way men linger anywhere they can stand in shade without owing money for it. 2 cowboys from the Mallet brand outfit were leaning on the porch rail when Mahalan tied the mule. They watched him without speaking. Inside, 3 more men stood near the counter where Peel was pricing salt pork from a barrel. Malin asked for salt, a second-hand iron kettle if one could be found, and 3 spare barrels. Peel wrote the request on a slate and said nothing for a moment. Salt, Peel repeated. Not flour, not cornmeal. Salt. Salt. How are those children eating, Vickery? We have meal for another week. After that, I will address it. You will address it? Peel set down the chalk. You have a dying mule, 2 growing children, no water source, and you ride 14 miles for salt. One of the cowboys pushed through the door. He had heard the exchange, and now he looked at Mahalon with the lazy curiosity of a man who has nothing better to do than watch another man fail. What does a sodbuster need salt for if he's not curing meat? I am making a wash for the cabin walls, Mahalon said. The silence that followed was the kind where men look at each other to confirm they heard the same thing. A wash, the cowboy said. White mineral wash, to reflect the heat. The cowboy looked at Ransom. Ransom looked at the cowboy. The second cowboy came through the door. You are going to paint your shack, the first one said. In a drought, with children going hungry, you are going to paint. The cabin stores heat, Mahalon said. White surfaces throw it back. The inside temperature. Mister, I have been on this flat since '81. The way you cool a house is you dig down or you find shade. You do not paint it like a church lady's fence. Peel smiled. It was the smile he used when a customer confirmed what Peel already knew, that the man was finished and did not know it yet. Vickery is building a ghost house, he said. White as snow. Right out there on the open flat where God and the sun can get a good look at it. The phrase caught. Mahalon could hear it catching. The way ghost house sat in the room like a stone dropped in a bucket. It would travel. By evening, it would be in every conversation in Estacado. By the end of the week, it would follow him like a second name. He signed for the salt. £3 charged against his account, which now stood at $99.22. He did not sign for the kettle or the barrels, because Peel would not extend more credit without the mule as security, and Mahalon would not sign over the mule for anything except salt. Celia Bostwick was outside the store when he left. She had been buying chalk for her school slate, and she had heard enough. Why salt and not flour? She asked. Because flour feeds us once, salt may hold the walls. She looked at him. She was a woman who understood the mathematics of scarcity. Every school day she allocated chalk, paper, and patience across children who had too little of everything. She recognized the logic even when it sounded like madness. If you succeed, she said, measure the difference. I will need the numbers for the school board when they ask why I let the schoolhouse cook my students. It was not encouragement. It was the beginning of a record. The ridicule followed him home. 2 boys on foot, sons of a mallet ranch hand, chased the mule for half a mile outside town, shouting, "Snowman, snowman," until the heat wore them out and they dropped behind. The words carried in still air. Clara, riding on the mule's rump behind the salt sack, heard every syllable. She waited until the boys were gone. Are they right? She asked. About what? That it is foolish. Mahalon stopped the mule. He took the chalkboard, the one Clara had labeled, from the sack where he kept it wrapped in cloth. He held it out to her. Then he reached into the sack and pulled out the dark board. Hold both, he said. Clara held one in each hand. The dark board had been in the sack out of direct sun, and it was still warm from the morning. The chalkboard was cool. Now hold them against your cheeks. She pressed the dark one to her left cheek and flinched. She pressed the chalk one to her right cheek and did not. That is not foolishness, Mahalon said. That is physics. What is physics? The reason the lizard sits on pale ground. Clara looked at both boards. She put the dark one back in the sack. She kept the chalk one on her lap. They rode the rest of the way in silence, and the mule's hooves kicked up dust that was white with caliche. That night, Malin sat in the cabin with the door open and felt the walls give back every degree they had borrowed from the sun. Ned was restless, his skin hot to the touch, his breathing shallow. Clara had soaked a rag in water they could not spare and laid it across her brother's forehead. The cook stove was cold. They could not afford the heat of a fire inside. And dinner had been cornmeal mixed with water, uncooked, because cooking would have made the air worse. The roof planks above him radiated warmth he could feel on his face when he looked up. The tar patches were worst, soft, almost sticky, holding the day's heat like an iron left on the stove. The south wall pulsed. The west wall pulsed. Even the dirt floor held warmth in the top inch. The cabin was not shelter. It was a box that collected heat all day and poured it back all night, so that the coolest hour was just before dawn, and by that point the bodies inside had been slow cooked for 7 hours in air that never dropped below what the sun had charged into every surface. Children died this way, not all at once, not with drama. They stopped eating. They stopped sleeping. They got nosebleeds that would not stop. Their skin dried until it cracked. Their urine darkened and their eyes sank, and they became quiet in a way that was not peace but surrender. Malin had seen Clara pour their last clean water over Ned's rag without being asked. She was 11 years old, and she was already rationing like a woman who had done it for years. She had learned it from Abel, who had learned it from the plains, which taught everything through loss. He could not let them stay in this box through July. The design took shape in the dark. Not all at once, but in the order a plasterer thinks. Surfaces first, then coats, then cure times, then weather. Roof first. The roof took the most direct sun and radiated the most heat downward. If he could coat the roof planks and tar patches with a reflective mineral wash, the ceiling would stop acting as a heat source. South wall second, it caught sun from mid-morning through afternoon. West wall third, afternoon and evening sun, the hottest hours. East wall last because morning sun was the weakest. Interior ceiling boards after the exterior to create a second reflective barrier. Vents at the ridge, gaps where hot air, which rises, could escape upward instead of pooling under the roof. Low openings on the north side, shaded, where cooler air could enter. A white skirt of clay and chalk dust around the cabin's base, so the ground immediately around the walls would reflect heat away instead of absorbing it and radiating it into the lower wall. It was not modern. It was not clever in the way that clever people would recognize. It was the logic of a plasterer who understood surfaces, a boy who remembered his mother's kitchen, and a man who had nothing else to try. He needed hundreds of pounds of material. He needed burned lime, which meant he needed a kiln. Even a crude pit would do. He needed fuel, which was scarce on treeless plains. He needed salt for brine. He needed milk for Kassan binder, and he had no cow. He needed time, which the heat was taking. He needed knowledge he did not fully have. But Malin had hauled hods of wet plaster up ladders in Indiana heat since he was 15. He knew the weight of a day's labor, and he knew the feeling of a wall becoming something better under his hands. He would start in the morning. He would coat this cabin so white it would look like snow dropped onto the plains in summer. And if the skeptics laughed, they could laugh at a ghost house while his children slept. The question was not whether the idea was sound. The question was whether he could find someone who knew the difference between chalk dust and real lime before the heat killed what it had already started to take. Tell us in the comments. Have you ever been doubted by someone who could not understand what you were building? He did not know that the answer was already traveling north from New Mexico on a freight wagon, sitting beside 3 sacks of dry mix mortar and a lime hammer worn smooth from 30 years of use. Malin's first batch failed on the 6th morning. He had spent 2 days hauling caliche nodules from the playa edge, cracking them with the back of Abel's hand axe, sorting the whitest pieces from the brown. He crushed them between flat stones until his shoulders burned, mixed the powder with water from a barrel he could not afford to drain, and spread the slurry across a test section of the south wall with a rag tied to a stick. It dried bright. For 1 hour, the south wall wore a patch of brilliant white that threw sunlight back so hard it made Clara squint from 20 feet away. Malin pressed his palm to the coated wood and felt the difference. Warm, but not the radiating burn of the dark surface beside it. The white patch was working. Then the wind came. Not a storm, not even a strong blow. Just the steady afternoon current that moved across the llano every day between 2 and 5 o'clock, carrying grit and heat in equal measure. The white slurry lifted in sheets. It did not peel, it powdered, releasing a cloud of chalk dust that drifted east like smoke from a dead fire. By evening, the test patch was gray and streaked. By morning, it was bare wood again. 2 days of hauling, 40 pounds of material. Gone. Clara's slate still read roof, none. South, none. West, none. Water, 1 barrel and a quarter. Malin sat on the ground with his back against the cabin's east wall, the only wall that had shade before noon, and looked at the white dust on his hands. The chalk would not hold because it was not lime. It had no chemical bond. It sat on the surface like flour on a table, waiting for the first hand to brush it away. He needed to transform the calcium in the rock, burn it hot enough to drive off the carbon, slake the powder into putty that would carbonate back to stone when it dried on the wood. He knew the principle, the way a man who has watched masons work knows their principles. In outline, without the details that keep a batch from exploding or a wall from blistering. He needed knowledge he did not have, and he was running out of days to not have it. Tomas Arrieta came with the freight. A 4-mule team hauling supplies for a ranch outfit south of Estacado had stopped near Malin's claim to water their animals at a stock tank a half-mile east. Tomas was riding with the outfit, not as a teamster, but as a hired hand. He repaired adobe ovens, replastered chimneys, and patched mission walls across New Mexico and West Texas for whatever a settlement or ranch would pay. He was 57 years old, brown as the ground, and he moved with the deliberate economy of a man who had spent decades working in heat and understood that wasted motion was wasted water. He would not have stopped except that he saw the white cloud. Malin was attempting a second batch. He had built a shallow pit near the cabin, lined it with flat stones, and heaped caliche nodules over a fire of twisted mesquite roots he had bought from the freighter for 60 cents. The idea was to burn the calcium. The execution was wrong. The fire was too cool. The nodules sat in low flame, cracking but not calcining. Malin had added water to the pit's edge to keep the stones from splitting outward, and the steam was mixing with chalk dust to create a white fog that hung around the cabin like weather. Tomas saw the fog from the freight road. He walked over without being invited. He watched for 2 minutes. Then he kicked the water bucket away from the pit's edge with 1 boot. The water splashed across Malin's shin. Malin stood up fast, fist tight, and found himself looking at a man who was not angry, but disgusted. "You are making quickite wet," Tomas said. His English was accented and precise, learned from American masons in Santa Fe. Quickite was his word for quickite, quicklime. If your fire gets hot enough to actually burn, and you have water next to the pit, it will burst. Lime and water make heat, fast heat. It will take your eyes. I was trying to keep the stones from cracking apart. The stones are supposed to crack apart. That is how you know they have burned. You do not know what you are doing. No, Malon said. I do not. The honesty stopped Tomas. He had expected argument. Men on the plains argued with anyone who told them they were wrong, because admitting ignorance felt like admitting weakness, and weakness killed. Malin did not argue. He stood with chalk dust on his face and a burned shin and said the truth. Tomas looked past him at the cabin. He saw the test boards lined up on the flat rock, dark, flour, chalk, with Clara's slate labels still legible. He saw the south wall where the failed slurry had left a ghost of white in the grain. He saw the tar patches on the roof, already softened and bubbling. He saw the ridge line where Malon had pried up 2 planks to make a vent gap, rough but functional. He saw a man who had the right idea, the right instinct, and none of the craft. Where did you learn to vent a roof? Tomas asked. My uncle built plaster walls in Indiana. Hot air rises. If it has nowhere to go, it sits on your head. Your uncle was a plasterer. I was his helper. I mixed and carried. Tomas nodded slowly. He walked to the test boards, crouched, and pressed his palm to each one the way Celia had. Flat, measuring. He looked at the chalkboard's surface, rubbed it with his thumb, and watched the powder come away. Chalk is not lime, he said. I know. Lime must be burned, properly burned, in a draft kiln with enough heat to drive the ite out of the stone, then slaked, water to the lime, never lime to the water, then mixed with salt for hardness and milk for bind, then applied thin. 5 thin coats are worth more than 1 thick one. A thick coat dries on the outside and stays wet underneath, and when the wet part finally dries, it shrinks and pulls away. He said this in the tone of a man reciting something he had known since childhood. He had learned it at a mission outside Albuquerque, repairing walls that Spanish priests had built with the same formula 200 years before. Lime burning was his trade, the way plastering was Malon's uncle's trade. Not a trick, but a discipline, with rules that existed because men had lost eyes and fingers learning them. You have caliche with calcium in it, Tomas said. Some of it will burn, some will not. You have to sort by weight and color. The heaviest, palest nodules have the most ite in them. The brown ones are clay and will give you nothing but mud. Can you show me? I'm not staying. I'm riding south with the freight. I'm not asking you to stay. I'm asking you to show me before you go. Tomas looked at the cabin again. He looked at Clara, who was standing in the doorway with the chalkboard pressed against her chest like a shield. He looked at Ned, who was sitting on the ground in a patch of white dust, because it was the palest surface he could find. One day, Tomas said, I'll show you the burn and the slake. After that, you are on your own. 1 day became 3. On the first day, Tomas sorted Malon's caliche pile into 2 heaps, burnable and useless. The burnable heap was less than 1/3 of what Malon had hauled. The rest was clay, ite poor calcium, and plain dirt. Malon watched the pile he had spent days collecting reduced to a fraction and said nothing, because saying something would not put the minerals back in the rock. Tomas built a proper burn pit, shallow, lined with flat stones, with a draft channel on the downwind side. A trench leading to the fire base, faced with rocks, open at the end so air would feed in low and push heat upward through the stacked nodules. The fuel was scarce. Mesquite roots were the best option, dense, slow-burning, hot. Dried cattle chips gave steady heat but lower temperature. Tomas used both, layered chips for the base, roots for the core, more chips banked around the edges. The fire must be hot enough to change the stone, Tomas said. If you burn too cool, the nodules crack, but the calcium stays locked. If you burn too hot, the lime vitrifies and becomes glass. You will learn the color. When the flame goes transparent at the base, and the nodules glow white at the edges, you are close. The burn took 6 hours. Malin fed fuel through the draft channel, while Thomas watched the color change. Clara kept Ned back. Thomas had made her repeat 3 times that burned lime could blind, and that steam from slaking could scald, and she had written both warnings on her slate. By evening, the nodules had transformed. The pale stones had become lighter, chalky, and brittle. Thomas cracked one with his lime hammer, a short-handled tool with a flat face worn smooth from decades, and the inside was white powder, calcium oxide, quicklime. Now the dangerous part, Thomas said. He filled a barrel halfway with water. Then, using a long-handled scoop fashioned from a tin, he added burned lime to the water in small portions. Never the other way. Water to lime would create a steam explosion, a barrel-bursting crack of heat that had blinded Caleros across the southwest. Lime to water was controlled. The water hissed and roiled and gave off heat that Mahalan could feel from 3 feet away. Thomas covered the barrel with a wet grain sack weighted with stones and stepped back. "Tomorrow," he said, "let it sit, let it cool, let the lime drink." The second day, Thomas showed Malin the binder. Salt brine, 2 pounds of salt dissolved in a gallon of water, slowed the drying time so the limewash would not crack off before it bonded. Sour milk added casein, a protein that acted as glue, and fine chalk dust, the same powdered caliche that had failed on its own, now served as body. It gave the limewash thickness and brightness without weakening the lime's bond. 3 parts slaked lime to 1 part chalk dust, Thomas said, 1 cupful of salt brine per bucket, a pour of sour milk, not fresh, the sourer the better. Thin with water until it runs off a brush like cream, not like paste. 5 coats, Malin said. At least 5 on the roof, 3 on the walls. Let each coat dry before the next. If you pile wet on wet, it traps water inside, and the whole thing lifts when it finally dries. Malin mixed the first real batch under Thomas's eye. The consistency was different from anything he had handled. Not plaster, not paint, but something between, with a mineral smell that cut through the heat. He brushed it onto a test board and watched it dry to a white so clean it hurt the eye. An hour later, he pressed his palm to the board. Warm, not hot. He rubbed his thumb across the surface. The white held. "It held," Clara said from behind him. Thomas did not smile. He said, "1 coat holds on a board, 5 coats hold on a roof in wind. You have not earned the word held yet." On the 3rd day, Thomas helped Malin coat the south wall's first section. They started before dawn to work in the coolest hours. Thomas mixed. Malin applied. Clara carried buckets. Ned was assigned to keep the wet sacks over the slaking barrel and to shout if he heard hissing. By 9 o'clock, the first coat covered the south wall from ground to eave. It was thin, uneven, and already beginning to dry in the direct sun. Thomas frowned at the speed of the drying. "You need to dampen the wood before you coat," he said. "Dry wood drinks the water out of the lime before the lime can set. Wet the wall with a rag first, then coat, then let it dry slow. That uses more water. Everything uses more water. That is why you are here instead of Indiana." By the 3rd afternoon, Thomas had not left. He had slept beside the burn pit, eaten Malin's cornmeal without complaint, and taught more in 72 hours than Malin's uncle had taught in 2 years, not because Thomas was more generous, because the need was more immediate. A plasterer in Indiana could learn slowly. A man with 2 children on the Llano in summer could not. Thomas looked at the south wall. First coat drying, it would need dampening again, then a second coat, then a third. The roof had not been touched. The west wall had not been touched. July was coming. I will stay until the roof is scraped, Tomas said. After that, you must do the coats yourself. I have work south. Malin did not thank him. Thanking felt wrong. It implied charity, and Tomas was not giving charity. He was responding to competence. He had seen a man doing the right thing wrong, and his craft would not let him walk away from that. Malin understood the feeling because he had felt it himself when he watched a mason apply plaster with the wrong pressure. The urge to fix was not kindness, it was discipline. They shook hands. Tomas's grip was dry and hard, and the skin on his palms was thick as boot leather. Teach the girl the ratios, Tomas said. She has a memory for numbers. If you die or collapse, she will be able to tell whoever finds you how to mix the batch. It was the most practical form of care Malin had ever heard. The days broke into a rhythm of burning, slaking, mixing, and coating that ate time the way the sun ate water. Day 8, the roof was scraped. Malin and Tomas pried off the worst tar patches and roughened the plank surfaces with the hand axe so the lime would grip. The dark wood underneath was stained and weathered and hot enough to blister skin. Malin's hands, already cracked from caliche dust, split further from the axe handle. Day 10. The first burned lime batch sat cooling in the slaking barrel. Tomas had supervised 2 more burns, teaching Mahlon to read the fire by color and sound. A low hiss meant the nodules were sweating moisture out. A crack meant they were converting. Silence meant the burn was done or the fire had died. Day 12. The south wall stood at 2 coats. In direct sun, Mahlon pressed his palm to the white surface and held it for a count of 5 without flinching. Beside it, the bare west wall burned his hand in 1 second. Day 14. The south wall received its 3rd coat. Clara updated her slate. Roof. Scraped, wet, no coat yet. South, 3 coats. West, 1 coat. East, none. Water, 3/4 of a barrel. The water calculation was the tension behind every stroke of the brush. Limewash required water. For slaking, for dampening wood, for thinning the mix, for cleaning tools. Every gallon used on the walls was a gallon not drunk by the children. Malin rationed brutally. He dampened the wood with a rag wrung almost dry. He thinned the mix as far as Tomas would allow. He recycled wash water by letting chalk settle out and pouring the clear water back into the cooking supply. Ned's nosebleed stopped during the 2nd week, then started again. The air was so dry that blood crusted in his nostrils and cracked when he breathed. Clara stuffed tallow into his nose at night, which helped, but the tallow was running low and had to be saved for Mahlon's hands. Day 17. The west wall stood at 3 coats. The cabin was becoming something strange. A dark structure turning white in patches, like an animal shedding winter fur in reverse. From a distance, it looked diseased. Up close, the contrast was shocking. White sections reflected light so hard they made shadows look darker, while the remaining dark sections seemed to absorb everything around them. Then the setback. A dust storm blew in from the northwest on the 18th morning. Not a full haboob, but a grinding, persistent wind that carried grit in horizontal sheets for 9 hours. The west wall's 3rd coat, applied the evening before and not yet fully cured, took the worst of it. Grit embedded in the surface, turning white lime to brown speckled crust. When the wind stopped, Mahlon touched the wall and felt sand under his fingers. The coat had not peeled, but it was ruined. The reflective surface was now a dull, gritty brown that absorbed heat almost as well as bare wood. He would have to scrape it off and start the 3rd coat again. 2 more days, 40 more pounds of material, Water he did not have. Tomas saw him staring at the wall. "This is why you do not coat before a blow," he said. "I did not know a blow was coming." You learn to read the sky. A brown line on the northwest horizon means grit. A yellow haze means fine dust. Clear sky with falling barometer means wind by morning. You do not have a barometer, so you learn the birds. When the horned larks go quiet before noon, wind is coming. The horned larks were singing this morning. Then they were wrong, or you heard the wrong birds. Tomas almost smiled. Lime does not forgive impatience, neither does the plains. The scraping took a full day. Malin's hands bled through the tallow wraps. Ransom Peel arrived on day 19 with 2 riders from the Mallet outfit. They sat their horses in a line and looked at the half-white cabin, south wall brilliant, west wall scrape raw, roof with one uneven coat that had not been finished, east wall still dark. The cabin looked like a thing caught between 2 states, neither finished nor abandoned, unable to be either. "You painted winter on a coffin," Peel said. The cowboys laughed. One of them shaded his eyes against the glare off the south wall and said the light was enough to blind a man's horse at 50 yards. Peel leaned forward in the saddle. "Vickery, your account is at $99.22. You have produced no crop, dug no well, and improved no structure on this claim. What you have done is coat half a shack with powder that will blow off in October. I am recording this as non-improvement. When the note comes due, I will present this cabin as evidence that the claim has been abandoned in all but body." Malin stood with the scraping tool in his hand, white dust on every surface of his body, blood on his knuckles. "The claim has not been abandoned. A man who paints a shack instead of plowing has abandoned his senses. The county will see it the same way." Clara stepped out of the cabin. She held the slate. "The south wall is 16 degrees cooler than the uncoated east wall at 3 o'clock, she said. "I measured with the school teacher's thermometer." Peel looked at the girl. The cowboys looked at the girl. She was 11 years old, barefoot, sunburned across the bridge of her nose, and she held the slate like a witness holding evidence. Peel did not respond to her. He turned his horse and rode north. The cowboys followed. One of them looked back at the cabin and shook his head, but the shake was different now, not derision exactly, but something closer to confusion. The numbers on the girl's slate did not fit the story Peel was telling. After they left, Tomas said, "The girl's measurement. Is it true?" "Celia Bostwick brought a thermometer 3 days ago," Malin said. "Clara has been recording every afternoon." Tomas nodded. 16 degrees is a start. You need 30 before it matters for sleeping." Unexpected help came in the shape of an old woman's sour milk. Orville Keck's wife, Lynette, kept 2 goats that were producing poorly in the drought. The milk had turned before she could use the last batch, and she sent Orville to ask if Malon wanted it for the children, a kindness wrapped in practicality, because dumping sour milk on the plains attracted coyotes, and coyotes spooked Orville's horses. Malin took the milk and used it for the limewash binder. Lynette heard through Orville what her milk was being used for, and she sent more the next week without being asked. She did not say she believed in the White House. She said she did not want coyotes. Clara offered to mend Orville's shirts in exchange for the use of his mule team for one final playa haul. Orville refused the mending and loaned the team anyway. He told Malon, "I am not helping your idea. I am helping the children." "The children and the idea are the same thing," Malin said. Orville did not respond to that. He drove the team south and brought back 400 pounds of caliche nodules in a single load, more than Mahlan had collected in 2 weeks of hauling by hand. The burn pit ran for 3 straight days. Tomas supervised the last burn before packing his tools. On day 24, the roof received its second coat. The south wall stood at 4 coats. The west wall, re-scraped after the dust storm, was back to 2 coats. The east wall had its first coat. Clara's slate read, Roof, 2. South, 4. West, 2. East, 1. Water, half barrel. Milk, 1 gallon, sour. Tomas left on the 25th day. He packed his tools onto the freight wagon, placed his lime hammer on the cabin's doorstep, and told Malin, "Do not teach people the recipe. Teach them the waiting. The recipe is simple. The patience is the craft." He shook Clara's hand as if she were an adult. He touched Ned's head once. He climbed onto the freight wagon and did not look back. Malin stood with the lime hammer in his hand and felt the weight of everything Tomas had left with him. Not just technique, but the understanding that lime burning was not a shortcut. It was a discipline. And discipline, on the South Plains, was the only thing the weather could not take. By early July, the cabin looked like a thing that did not belong to the landscape. Roof, walls, door, chimney base, water barrel shade boards, and even the flat rocks around the cabin's perimeter, all white. The limewash had dried to a hard, mineral surface that threw sunlight back with an intensity that made riders shade their eyes from a quarter-mile away. At noon, the cabin glowed. It looked like snow had fallen on a single structure and refused to melt. Cowboys had stopped calling it the ghost house to Malin's face. The glare was enough reason to avoid riding close, and avoiding a thing was easier than mocking it. But the name held in estacado. Peel repeated it. The phrase traveled. Celia brought her thermometer on a Saturday and stayed until 4 o'clock. She set 3 test stations, a dark cedar board in full sun, the first chalk slurry board that had failed weeks ago, and a section of Tomas's limewash board that had been weathering since the first successful batch. She measured each surface with the thermometer pressed flat. The dark board read 141 degrees in direct sun. The chalkboard, recoated and powdering again, read 119. The limewash board read 104. Inside the cabin at 3 o'clock, the air temperature was 96 degrees. Outside in the shade of the south overhang, a narrow strip where the white wall threw shadow onto white ground, the air was 108. The difference was 12 degrees. 12 degrees is not comfort, Celia said, but it is the difference between a child sleeping and a child seizing. Isaac Pancos came back on a Tuesday. He did not announce himself. He rode the gray mare to the fence line, sat for several minutes looking at the white cabin, and then dismounted. He placed his palm on the south wall. 4 coats, fully cured, hard as plaster. He held it there. He moved his hand to the fence post beside the cabin, which was dark and uncoated. He held it there for 1 second and pulled away. "I told you this house drinks sun," Pancos said. "I did not think to ask whether it could be taught to refuse. It is not refusing. It is reflecting. The white surface sends the light back before the wood can store it." Pancos looked at the roof. How much material? 600 pounds of caliche burned down to roughly 200 of lime, 30 pounds of salt, 8 gallons of sour milk over 3 weeks, 40 days of labor. 40 days. And a man from New Mexico who knew what I did not. Pancos put his hat on. "The heat has not come yet, Vickery. This is June. July is the test. A wall that is warm in June may still be hot in July." He mounted and rode toward Estacado. He did not tell Malone to leave. He did not tell him to stay. He said the wall might not be enough, and the absence of a verdict was the closest thing to hope Pancos had ever offered anyone on the plains. Orville came that evening. He pressed his palm to the white wall and the dark fence post. the same test Pancoast had performed. He said, "The wall is cooler, 12 degrees inside. And the roof? The roof boards do not radiate heat downward after 2 o'clock the way they used to. Before, you could feel the ceiling from 3 feet below. Now you have to press your hand to it." Orville looked at the roof and did not say the words, "I was wrong," because Orville Keck would need to see July before he said those words. But he said something that mattered more for the days ahead. "Linnet is 8 months along. If the heat comes hard, our lean-to will not hold her." He did not ask. He did not have to. The question was under the words, like water under caliche. Invisible, but the whole surface depended on it. "The cabin will be open," Malin said. Orville nodded once and left. The sky that evening was clear and still, and the color of brass at the horizon. No clouds. No wind. The buffalo grass had gone from brown to gray, brittle enough to snap underfoot like glass. A freight driver passing through reported that a stock tank south of the Mallet headquarters had gone dry for the first time in 3 years. Chickens were dying in dark coops where the tarred roofs held heat past midnight. A woman had fainted inside a dugout that had no ventilation, and her husband had found her on the dirt floor with her skin dry as paper. The heat was building the way water builds behind a dam, not visible until it breaks. And the white cabin sat on the open plain like a single bright stone in a dark field, waiting to find out whether physics and lime and salt and a dead man's children were enough to answer a question the frontier had not bothered to ask before: whether a house could be taught to refuse the sun. The 17th of July came without warning. There was no storm to announce it, no wind shift, no drop in pressure that the body could feel. The air simply stopped moving at dawn, and by 8 o'clock, the horizon shimmered in every direction like the surface of a lake that did not exist. The freight driver's thermometer on Peel's store porch read 94 degrees by 9 o'clock. By noon, it read 104. By 3 o'clock, it read 108 in the shade, and there was almost no shade in Estacado because the shade itself was hot. At Mahlan's cabin, the white roof threw glare so hard that Celia, arriving with a water jug and her thermometer, had to shield her eyes with both hands. The ground around the cabin was bright. The chalk dust skirt Malin had spread reflected enough light to wash out the shadows. From a distance, the cabin looked like it was generating its own light, a white coal burning in reverse. Inside, the air was still. Malin had closed the south shutter before noon, the way Tomas had taught him. The low north gap was open, a slot 6 inches high at the base of the north wall where cooler ground-level air could enter. The ridge vent was open, pulling warm air upward and out. The system was simple: cool air in low, hot air out high. Not a breeze, a whisper of movement that kept the air from stagnating. Celia placed her thermometer on the floor near Ned's cot. At 2 o'clock, it read 91 degrees. Against the south wall at chest height, 93. Against the ceiling, 98. Outside in the shade of the south overhang, 109. The difference was 18 degrees between the ceiling and the outside shade. Between the floor where the children sat and the open air, it was more. "This is survivable," Celia said. "This is Tuesday," Malin said. "The freighter said the heat will build through the week." Ned's fever started that afternoon. The boy had been helping carry water from the barrel to the slaking tub. Not heavy work, but work in heat, which was different. Heat work drained a body from the inside. The sweat stopped before the effort did, and when the sweat stopped, the body began to cook itself. Ned sat down on the dirt floor and did not get up. His skin was hot and dry. His eyes were glassy. He vomited once and then dry heaved because there was nothing in him to bring up. Malin carried him to the cot and felt the panic that lives under every parent's composure. The knowledge that a child's body is smaller, holds less water, fails faster. Ned was 6 years old and had been on the South Plains for less than 2 months, and his body had not learned the rationing that adult bodies learn over years of deprivation. Clara had already soaked a rag. She laid it across Ned's forehead without being told. Then she wet a second rag and pressed it to his wrists and the insides of his elbows, the pulse points where blood ran close to the surface. She had watched Tomas do this during the last hot week before he left, when a freight driver had come to the cabin with heat cramps, and Tomas had cooled him methodically, point by point, wasting no water on skin that did not matter. "Pulse points first," Clara said. "Wet cloth on wrists, neck, and inside elbows. Do not soak the blanket. The blanket holds heat." She was 11 years old, reciting a dead man's lessons in a white cabin on the open plains, while her brother shivered with heat that his body could not release. The second complication arrived the next morning. Lynette Keck came walking. She carried her infant, 3 weeks old, born in the lean-to during a night so hot that Orville had hung wet sheets from the ceiling and they had dried before dawn. Lynette was 26, thin from nursing in drought, and the skin on her face was peeling from sun exposure. The infant was quiet. Too quiet. "Orville is out with the wagon," Lynette said. "He left before the heat. The lean-to is... I cannot keep the baby in the lean-to." Malin did not ask what the lean-to was like. He had seen it. Tar paper walls on a cottonwood frame, black as a cook stove, with no ventilation and no shadeboard on the roof. Inside it, the air would be 115 degrees or more, lethal for an infant. He brought her in. The cabin was 14 by 18 feet. It now held Malin, Clara, Ned on the cot, Lynette, and the infant. 5 bodies in a space built for 2, each one generating heat, each one consuming water and air. The temperature inside rose 1 degree within an hour. Then another. The ridge vent was pulling, but the bodies were adding heat faster than the vent could shed it. By noon of the second day, Celia's thermometer read 95 at floor level, 4 degrees higher than the day before. "More people makes it hotter," Clara said, reading the slate. "More people is why we built it," Malin said. "If you are invested in this story, stay with us. Because the next choice decides whether this White House becomes a refuge or a tomb." The third day broke 110 on Peel's porch by early afternoon. A rider came from the south with news that a cowboy from the Mallet outfit had been found dead inside a dark wagon box where he had tried to sleep through the afternoon. The wagon's black tar paper cover had held the heat so completely that the man had cooked in his sleep. His skin was blistered when they found him. At 4 o'clock on the third day, Ransom Peel rode up to Malin's fence line. His horse was blowing hard, white foam on the bit, and Peel himself was swaying in the saddle. His face was the color of raw steak. His canteen was empty. The stopper was out, and the strap was dark with the last drops he had poured over his own head an hour ago. His horse had thrown a shoe somewhere on the Estacado Road, and the limp had slowed them enough that the heat had caught them both. Clara saw him first. She came to the doorway and looked at the man who had called her home a coffin. The man who had told her uncle the debt would follow him like a second shadow. The man who had suggested taking her and Ned away. "He is going to fall off his horse," she said. Malin came to the door. Peel was gripping the saddle horn with both hands, and his head was hanging forward. He was not unconscious, but he was close. The muscles in his neck were not fully holding his skull upright, and his breathing was the shallow, rapid panting of a body trying to cool itself through lungs because the skin had stopped working. "Leave him," Clara said. She did not say it with cruelty. She said it with the arithmetic of a child who had been counting water for weeks. Every cup they gave Peel was a cup Ned did not drink. Malin walked out into the heat. The ground burned through his boots. The white skirt of chalk around the cabin threw light upward into his face. He reached Peel's horse in 12 steps, pulled Peel from the saddle, and half carried, half dragged him across the white ground and through the doorway. Inside, the air was 96 degrees. Peel gasped as if he had been plunged into water. The difference between outside and inside, 14 degrees, hit his body like a drink. Clara, without being asked, wet a rag and put it on his wrists. She did not look at Malin while she did it. 5 adults, 1 infant, 1 child, 1 cot, 1 cabin, 2 barrels of water that had to last until Orville returned with the wagon or the heat broke, whichever came first, if either came at all. The evening wind died. It had been the one thing keeping the system working. Hot air out the ridge vent, cooler air in the north gap. The cycle depended on some movement, some stirring of the atmosphere to draw the hot column upward. When the wind stopped, the vent stopped pulling. The hot air pooled against the ceiling and sat there, pressing down on the room like a hand on a chest. By 9 o'clock, the floor temperature had risen to 97. By 10, 98. The ceiling was 103. The bodies in the room were generating heat they could not shed, and the walls, despite their white coats, were beginning to release the stored warmth of the day. Not as much as dark walls would have, but more than 0. Nothing reflected perfectly. The lime held back the sun, but it did not erase it. Ned was worse. His breathing had gone shallow and fast. Clara had used the last clean rag on his neck and was recycling damp cloth from Peel's wrists, taking from the man who had threatened them to give to the boy she loved. Malin looked at the ceiling. The ridge vent was open, but without wind, the hot air had no reason to leave. It sat in the peak of the roof like smoke in a chimney with no draft. Below it, the temperature was climbing. He needed to get onto the roof. Tomas had warned him about this. If the wind dies, you must create draft. Open the vent wider. If the vent is clogged, clear it. The limewash can seal cracks you intended to leave open. Check the vent after every coat. The vent was clogged. Lime slurry from the roof's final coat had seeped into the ridge gap and dried into a partial seal. Not completely blocked. Air still moved through the narrowed opening, but restricted enough that the natural convection cycle had stalled when the external wind stopped. Malin took the scraping tool, a flat iron blade on a short handle, and went outside. The roof was 8 feet off the ground. He had no ladder. He dragged Abel's trunk against the east wall, stood on it, and pulled himself up onto the roof edge. The lime surface was gritty under his palms. His hands, already cracked and bleeding from weeks of lime work, sent pain up through his forearms with every grip. The roof at night was still warm, not burning the way it would have been without the lime wash, but holding the last hours of the day's heat in the wood beneath the white surface. He crawled on hands and knees toward the ridge, feeling the crust give slightly under his weight. One knee punched through a patch where the lime had dried over a gap in the planking. His kneecap hit the rough plank edge, and he felt skin tear. He did not stop. Below him, Clara was counting Ned's breaths, the way Tomas had taught her. 12 to 15 was safe. Above 20 meant the body was fighting. 19, she called through the vent gap. Malin reached the ridge. The lime seal was visible in the moonlight, a white ridge where slurry had pooled and hardened. He wedged the scraping tool into the gap and pried. The dried lime cracked and fell inward, showering the room below with white dust that made Lynette cough and the baby cry. He scraped 3 feet of vent clear. then 4, then the full length of the ridge on the leeward side. The gap opened. The hot air that had been pooling against the ceiling found the exit and rose, not fast, not dramatic, but steady. A column of heat lifting out of the cabin like breath leaving a body. Below, Clara held the thermometer against the ceiling. 101, she said. Malin kept scraping. 99. He cleared the last of the lime seal and sat on the ridge with his legs hanging over the edge. His knee was bleeding through his trouser leg. His palms were raw. The moon lit the white roof so brightly that the cabin threw a faint glow onto the dark ground around it, like a lantern lying on its side. Below, the temperature fell slowly, the way temperature falls when the source of heat has been cut, but the mass still holds the warmth. 98, 97, 95 by midnight. Ned's breathing slowed. 14 breaths a minute, 12. He slept. Ransom Peel was lying against the east wall with a wet rag across his face. He pulled it aside and looked at the white wall beside him. It was not cool, but it was not the wall of a coffin. It was the wall of the only structure within 14 miles that had not tried to kill the people inside it. He said nothing. The silence in the room was not peace. It was the exhausted, fragile quiet of people who had survived one night and did not yet know whether there would be a second. But the cabin held. The white walls held. The lime held. The ridge vent cleared, and the hot air rose, and the children breathed, and the man who had called it a coffin slept inside it because the alternative was dying outside. The white roof glowed in the dark like something that did not belong to the plains, a bright wound in the landscape, a house that had learned to refuse the sun. And the sun was not finished. The heat broke on the 5th day. Not with rain. Rain would not come for another 3 weeks, but with a shift in the upper wind that pulled the stagnant air mass east and replaced it with something 10 degrees cooler that still would have killed a man in Indiana, but felt like mercy on the Llano Estacado. Malin opened the south shutter at dawn and let the air move through. Isaac Pancoast arrived before 8 o'clock. He rode the gray mare at a walk, and his face carried the expression of a man who had expected to find bodies. He did not find bodies. He found Lynette Keck nursing her infant in the doorway, the baby alert and feeding. He found Ned sitting upright on the cot, thin and drawn but breathing normally, eating cornmeal mush from a tin cup. He found Clara recording the morning temperature on her slate. Inside, floor 88, outside, shade 97. He found Ransom Peel sitting against the east wall with his boots off and his eyes open, looking at the white surface beside him as though it owed him an explanation. And he found Malin on his knees outside, patching a section of the ground skirt where foot traffic had worn the chalk away during the crisis. Pancoast dismounted. He walked to the south wall and placed his palm flat against the lime surface. He held it. Then he crossed to the fence post. Dark, uncoated. The same post he had touched weeks ago, and placed his palm there. He pulled away in 2 seconds. He came back to the white wall and stood with his hand pressed to it for a long time. "I told you this house drank sun," Pancoast said. "I did not ask whether it could be taught to refuse it." "You said that before," Malin said. "Before the heat." "Before the heat, I said it as a question. Now I am saying it as a fact." Pancoast looked at the roof, which was glaring white in the morning sun, throwing light upward and outward. "How many died?" "In the area?" "In the area." "The mallet cowboy in the wagon box. A freighter's wife south of town. Heat stroke in a dark dugout with no vent. Chickens, goats, 2 horses. No one in this cabin." Pancoast was quiet. He looked at the doorway where Linnet sat with the infant. He looked at Ransom, who was pretending not to listen. He looked at Clara's slate, where the temperature records ran in neat columns across the surface. "What do you need?" Pancoast asked. It was the first time anyone with authority on the South Plains had asked Mullen that question. Not, "What are you doing?" Not, "Why are you wasting time?" Not, "When will you leave?" "What do you need?" "I need people to learn the method," Mullen said. "But I need them to learn it safely. Burned lime blinds, slaking barrels burst, thick coats fail. If someone copies this wrong, they lose their eyes, or they lose the coating in the first wind, and blame the idea instead of the execution. Then you will teach it properly. I will need a place to demonstrate, and I will need people to believe a plasterer from Indiana over a storekeeper who calls this a ghost house." Pancoast looked at Ransom again. Ransom did not meet his eyes. "The meeting house," Pancoast said. "West wall. It faces the afternoon sun, and the elders can barely sit through a 2-hour meeting in July. You will coat it. I will make certain people watch." He mounted and rode toward Estacado. Mullen watched him go and felt something shift in the balance of things. Not victory, not yet, but the weight of authority moving from one side of the question to the other. Orville Keck came that afternoon. He walked the full perimeter of the cabin without speaking, pressing his palm to each wall in sequence, south, west, north, east. He tested the roof overhang where he could reach it. He crouched and touched the white ground skirt. He went inside and stood with his hand against the ceiling, which was warm but not radiating. He came out and sat on Abel's trunk. "When did you know?" he asked. "Know what?" "That it would work." Mullen sat beside him. "I did not know. The test board showed the difference, but boards are not walls. Walls are not roofs. A roof in June is not a roof in July. I did not know until Clara read me the temperature with 7 people inside and the number was under 100. 96. You heard. Lynette told me. She said the baby stopped crying inside your cabin for the first time in a week. She said it was because the air was cooler than the air in our lean-to had ever been, even at night. Orville looked at his hands. "I told you that you were trying to cool a stove by painting it." "You did." "I was wrong about the painting." "I was not wrong about the stove. Your cabin was a stove. You just figured out how to stop it from heating up." He stood. "I want you to show me the mix. Not for my lean-to, that is tar paper on sticks, and there is no saving it. For the milk shed. The milk goes sour in half a day because the shed roof is black. If I can keep the shed 10 degrees cooler, Lynette's goats will be worth something again. Bring me the sour milk she cannot use. I will show you the mix when I show the meeting house." Orville nodded. He started walking, stopped, and turned back. "The wall test convinced me before the heat did. I want you to know that." The day Clara held the 2 boards to her cheeks and dropped the dark one, I saw that from my wagon. I did not say anything because saying anything would have meant admitting I was wrong, and I did not want to be wrong about a plasterer from Indiana who had been on the plains for a week. He walked south toward his claim. Mullen let the words settle and did not call after him, because calling after a man who had just said the hardest kind of truth would have diminished it. The community came in 1s and 2s over the following week, the way water finds a channel, not all at once, but each drop following the path the previous one had cut. A ranch cook named Emmett Scholes rode out to see the cabin because the mallet bunkhouse had become unlivable, and the foreman was talking about digging a new dugout. Scholes walked the perimeter, touched the walls, stood inside for 10 minutes, and asked Mullen for the recipe. Mullen did not give it. He said, "Come to the meeting house on Saturday. I'll show you what to do and what not to do." A widow named Dorothea Plunkett sent her teenage son Virgil to ask if the whitewash could be put on a canvas wagon cover. Malin said he did not know. Canvas was not wood, and the lime might not bond the same way. He said they would test it. A freighter passing through stopped because the glare from the roof had attracted his attention from a mile away. He asked what Malin had used. Malin said lime, salt, and milk. The freighter said his wife had been sick since June, and their cabin near Colorado City had a dark shingle roof. Malin told him to find a calero, a lime burner, in his area and learn the process before trying it alone. You could sell this, the freighter said. You cannot sell lime burning. You can only teach it. Celia posted a record on a slate board outside the Estacado schoolhouse. 3 columns, dark board, chalkboard, lime board. Under each, the temperatures she and Clara had measured every day for 2 weeks. Children touched the boards during recess. Adults stopped to read the numbers on their way to Peel's store and pretended they had not. The numbers were difficult to argue with. The dark board in direct sun, 141 degrees. The chalkboard, 119. The limewash board, 104. Inside the white cabin during the worst heat, 96 at floor level. Inside Orville's dark lean-to during the same afternoon, 118, 22 degrees. The difference between a child sleeping and a child seizing, between milk lasting a day and milk lasting 2, between a man working through July and a man lying on a dirt floor waiting for the sun to finish. Ransom Peel's reaction was defensive and immediate. He told anyone who asked that the cabin had survived because of luck, a freak airflow, a favorable orientation, the shade cast by the water barrels. He said the whitewash was a novelty that would peel in October and leave Malin with bare walls and nothing to show for his labor. He said the glare was a hazard to livestock and that any cattleman with sense would file a nuisance complaint. But he could not deny that he had been carried into the cabin half dead and carried out alive. The cowboys who had laughed at the ghost house now repeated the phrase with a different inflection, not mockery, but something closer to wonder, the way a man repeats a joke that turned out to be a prophecy. And Peel's silence inside the cabin, his long look at the white wall, his failure to speak, had been witnessed by everyone present and reported to everyone absent. The silence was louder than anything he said afterward. Tomas Arrieta came back in September. He arrived on the same freight route he had left by, thinner than before, with a cough that started at the base of his chest and climbed into his throat before it broke. He had spent the summer repairing chimneys and ovens at 3 ranch outfits south of the Caprock, and the caliche dust and lime powder he had breathed for 30 years was collecting its debt. He saw the cabin from the freight road and stopped the wagon. It was fully white now. Every surface that faced the sun, roof, walls, door, chimney base, barrel boards, ground skirt, wore 5 coats of limewash that had cured into a mineral shell harder than the wood beneath it. The cabin did not look like a building. It looked like a piece of the sky had fallen and solidified, a white block sitting on brown earth under a blue expanse, refusing to match either. Tomas climbed down from the wagon and walked to the south wall. He ran his hand across the surface the way a man runs his hand across finished work, not testing, but reading. His fingers found the ridges where Malin's brush strokes overlapped. He found the spots where Clara had applied a section and her shorter reach had left a visible line. He found the place near the eave where the dust storm had damaged the 3rd coat and Malin had scraped and reapplied, leaving a slightly different texture. You listened, Tomas said. I listened. The vent? Clogged during the worst night. I cleared it from the roof. With what? The scraping tool, on my hands and knees. One knee went through the lime. Tomas looked at Malin's hands. The scars from the lime burns were pale and tight across the knuckles. The nails on 2 fingers of his right hand had thickened and yellowed where caustic lime had gotten under them and damaged the beds. These were not temporary marks. They were the permanent record of the work. "Show me the inside," Tomas said. They went in together. Tomas placed his hand on the interior ceiling, coated white from below, reflecting heat back upward toward the vented ridge. He checked the north gap, the south shutter, the way the air moved through the space in a slow, steady cycle. He nodded at Clara's slate, still hanging on a nail, still updated daily. "The girl keeps better records than most Caleros I've known," he said. "She learned from Celia Bostwick, and from you. From me, she learned how to keep lime out of her eyes. From the teacher, she learned how to write it down." He coughed, a deep, productive sound that shook his ribs. "The writing matters more." He stayed, not because Malin asked, because the cough was worsening, and the freight outfit he had been traveling with was headed into the Panhandle, where September nights were already cold enough to make a man with bad lungs miserable. Malin offered the cabin. Tomas accepted with the condition that he would work. He would help coat the meeting house, teach the method to anyone Malin brought, and improve the formula where he saw room. The improvements were small, but significant. Tomas showed Malin how to add a thin final coat of nearly pure slaked lime, almost no chalk dust, almost no milk, just lime and salt water that dried to a glass-smooth surface which shed rain and wind-driven grit better than the rougher working coats beneath it. He called it the face coat. It was the difference between a wall that lasted 1 season and a wall that lasted 3. He showed Malin how to test the lime by dropping a pinch into vinegar. If it fizzed hard, the calcium was active and the burn had been good. If it fizzed weakly, the burn had been too cool and the nodules needed another pass through the fire. If it did not fizz at all, the material was clay and worthless. He showed Clara how to measure salt by feel. A handful dissolved in a cup of water and tasted. If it tasted like tears, it was enough. If it tasted like the sea, it was too much. And he taught Malin the thing he had withheld until now, how to read a wall after 1 year. "Tap it," Tomas said, knocking his knuckle against the south wall. The sound was hard, mineral, almost ceramic. If it rings, the lime has carbonated fully. The calcium has gone back to stone. That wall is now limestone, thin as paper, but strong as the rock it came from. If it thuds, the inside is still soft. It needs another season. He knocked several spots. The south wall rang. The west wall rang. 1 section of the east wall thudded. The area that had received only 3 coats instead of 5. "That section will powder in spring," Tomas said. "Give it 2 more coats before the cold." They worked together for 8 days. Tomas mixed while Malin applied. Clara carried. Ned, recovered now, thinner but steady, was assigned to manage the slaking barrel, which he did with the solemn precision of a boy who had been told the barrel could blind him and believed it. Tomas told stories while they worked, not lessons disguised as stories, real stories, about the missions he had repaired in New Mexico, the adobe walls that had stood for 2 centuries because someone had mixed the plaster right, the calero in Bernalillo, who had burned lime for 40 years and could judge a batch by the sound of the fire alone. He told Malin about a church wall in Socorro that had been whitewashed every spring since 17-something, and each spring the lime coat bonded to the one beneath it until the wall was 3 inches thicker than the adobe it covered, a skin of stone built 1 season at a time. "That is what you are building," Tomas said. "Not a coating, a second wall. Every year it gets stronger." On the 9th day, his cough brought blood. It was not much. A thread of red in the spit he turned away to clear. But Malon saw it, and Tomas saw that Malon saw, and the look that passed between them was the look of two men who understood what a persistent cough in blood meant on the frontier, where the word consumption was spoken the way the word flood was spoken, as something that came for you and did not negotiate. I should go south before the cold, Tomas said. You should rest before you go anywhere. I have rested. I am resting now. This is resting. He gestured at the wall he was mixing lime for. Work I know how to do is rest. Sitting in a wagon coughing is not rest. But the fever came that night. Tomas woke at 2 a.m. with his shirt soaked and his skin so hot that Clara, checking on him at Mahlon's instruction, thought at first that the wall beside his bedroll had somehow started radiating heat again. It had not. The heat was coming from inside him. 3 days. Mahlon kept him in the white cabin where the air was coolest, the vent was clear, and the dawn breeze moved through the north gap without interruption. Clara applied the same protocol she had used for Ned. Wet rags on pulse points, small sips of water, shade from direct light through the south shutter. Celia came and sat with him in the evenings, and Tomas told her about the Socorro church wall, and she wrote it down because she wrote everything down and because she knew that a man telling stories about his life's work was a man preparing to be finished with it. On the third morning, Tomas asked Mahlon to bring him the lime hammer. It was sitting on the doorstep where Tomas had placed it months ago. Mahlon brought it inside. Tomas held it in both hands, turning it, feeling the smooth face that 30 years of striking had polished to a dull shine. Do not teach them the recipe, Tomas said. Teach them the waiting. The recipe is simple. Anyone can mix lime and salt and milk. The waiting is the craft. Waiting for the burn. Waiting for the slake. Waiting between coats. Waiting for the cure. People will skip the waiting because waiting feels like wasting, and every coat they skip will fail, and they will blame the lime instead of themselves. He put the hammer in Mahlon's hands. That wall in Socorro has 200 coats, he said. Each one is a year of someone's patience. He died the next morning before dawn in the white cabin he had helped build, on a floor that was cooler than any floor on the South Plains, because the roof above it threw back the sun, and the walls beside it refused to store what the sky delivered. Mahlon buried him east of the cabin, where the morning shade would fall across the grave for the first hour of every day. Clara marked the spot with a flat stone whitewashed on top. For 3 days after, Mahlon did not mix lime. He did not coat walls. He did not teach anyone anything. He sat on the ground beside Tomas's grave in the mornings and held the lime hammer and felt the absence of the only person who had treated his idea not as madness or charity, but as craft worth perfecting. On the 4th morning, Celia came. She did not speak. She set a bucket of sour milk beside the burn pit, laid a sack of salt next to it, and sat on the trunk. When Mahlon looked at her, she said, "The meeting house west wall is still dark. Pancos is asking when you will start." Mahlon stood up. He took the lime hammer to the burn pit and cracked 3 caliche nodules with it. The sound was bright and sharp in the still air, and Clara came to the doorway when she heard it because she knew what the sound meant. Work was starting again, the kind of work Tomas had taught, patient, layered, one coat at a time. The grass fire started on the 23rd of September, 3 weeks after Tomas died. Dry lightning struck the buffalo grass along the draw southeast of Estacado at 4 in the afternoon. The grass had not seen rain since June. It was not brown. It was gray, the color of ash, and it burned the way ash burns when wind hits it, fast, low, and wide. The wind was from the southeast, pushing the fire line northwest toward the Estacado. Smoke was visible from Mahlon's cabin within an hour, a brown smudge on the horizon that thickened and yellowed as the sun dropped. By 6 o'clock, The smell had arrived. Sharp, acrid, the scent of a world too dry to do anything but burn. Malin had been coating the meeting house west wall that week. 3 coats applied, 2 more planned. The meeting house was the largest structure in Estacado, wow, 30 feet long, dark plank construction with a cedar shake roof that had never been treated with anything except weather. It sat in the center of the settlement with the school on one side and Peel's store on the other. The fire was not heading directly for the settlement. Wind patterns on the open plains were unpredictable, and the fire line was still 4 miles out when the smoke arrived. But dry lightning could strike again, embers could travel, and a single spark on an untreated cedar shake roof would turn the meeting house into a torch. Malin did not claim that limewash was fireproof. It was not. Calcium carbonate did not burn, but the wood beneath it did, and a fire hot enough to crack the lime coat would reach the wood in minutes. What the lime coat did was buy time. A dark, untreated surface ignited when embers landed because the dry wood was already hot from a day of absorbing sun. A white, lime-coated surface was cooler, and the mineral layer smothered small embers the way sand smothers a campfire. It denied them the direct contact with fuel they needed to catch. Tomas had told him this, not as a promise, but as an observation from decades of working on mission buildings in fire country. Whitewashed walls do not save a building from fire, Tomas had said. They save a building from the first 5 minutes of fire. After 5 minutes, nothing saves a building except water and distance. 5 minutes was enough if you used it. Malin organized the response the way a man organizes a response who has no authority, but does have a bucket and a plan. He sent Clara running to Pancoast with a message. Wet the meeting house roof and keep wetting it. He sent Ned, too young for firework, but fast, to Orville's claim with a message, bring the wagon and every barrel. He climbed onto the meeting house roof himself. The 3 coats of limewash he had already applied covered the west wall and half the south wall. The roof had 1 coat on the western slope. Thin, applied 2 days ago, not fully cured. The eastern slope was untreated. From the roof he could see the fire line. It was wider than he had expected, a front of low flame and thick smoke stretching a mile across the open grass, moving northwest at the speed of a walking man, not fast, not yet. But the wind was freshening, and fresh wind on the plains was the difference between a grass fire that burned itself out and a grass fire that ran. Pancoast arrived with 2 men from the settlement. They carried buckets from the well. Malin directed them to wet the untreated eastern roof slope, pour water on the bare wood, soak the cedar shakes until they were too saturated to catch from a stray ember. The treated western slope he left dry. Wetting the lime coat would not help and might soften the uncured top layer. The fire reached the outbuildings south of town at dusk, a dark shed, Emmett Scholz's chicken coop, tar paper, and raw wood caught first. It went up in a rush of heat and noise that sent chickens screaming into the smoke. The fire had not even reached it directly. Wind-driven embers had landed on the tar paper roof, found purchase on the sun-heated surface, and burned through the covering in less than a minute. The school was next in line. Celia was inside with 2 children who had been left by parents fighting the fire on the southern edge. She was pulling slates and books from shelves when Malin reached the door. "Get them out," he said. "The slates. Leave the slates. Get the children out." Celia grabbed both children, a boy of 8 and a girl of 6, and pulled them through the door. Malin looked at the school's roof. Dark planks, untreated, dry as matchwood. If an ember landed, the school would burn faster than Scholz's shed. He could not coat a roof in 5 minutes, but he could apply what Tomas had taught him about buying time. He climbed onto the school's low porch roof, pulled himself to the main ridge, and scraped the dry grass and debris from the peak where embers would collect. He raked the cedar shakes clean of dust and tinder with the flat of his hand. Then he poured the last bucket of water across the windward slope. Not enough to soak the wood, but enough to make the surface damp where embers would land first. Below, the fire line reached the southern edge of the settlement. Orville arrived with the wagon and 3 barrels. Men formed a bucket line from the well to the meeting house roof. Women soaked blankets and beat out small grass fires that had jumped ahead of the main front. The meeting house's west wall, 3 coats of limewash, took a direct hit of wind-blown embers. Machlin watched from the school roof as red sparks landed on the white surface and died. They did not catch. The lime coat smothered them the way it smothered the sun's heat, by refusing to participate. The sparks sat on the mineral surface, glowed for a moment, and went black. On the untreated east wall, the same sparks found dry wood. A section near the eave began to smolder, thin smoke curling from the grain where heat had dried the wood to tinder. Pancoast's men hit it with a wet blanket, and the smoldering stopped, but the lesson was visible to everyone present. The white wall held. The dark wall caught. If this story reminds you why preparation matters, share it with someone who needs to hear it. The fire burned past Estacado by midnight. It took Shoal's shed, a fence line, 2 haystacks, and the southern privy. It did not take the meeting house, the school, or any occupied structure. The bucket line and the wet blankets deserved most of the credit, but the west wall of the meeting house, standing white and unmarked while the east wall wore a black scar from the smoldering south, told a story that buckets alone could not tell. Celia stood in front of the meeting house at dawn, with smoke still hanging in the air. She looked at the 2 walls and said what Orville had said weeks before, stripped to its simplest form. The white wall held. Malin looked at the lime hammer in his belt loop. He could hear Tomas's voice. 5 minutes. Whitewash buys you 5 minutes. After 5 minutes, nothing saves a building except water and distance. 5 minutes had been enough, because Malin had used those 5 minutes to organize the water and the distance. The lime had not saved the building. The lime had saved the time, and the time had saved the building. Ransom Peel's response to the fire revealed the shape of a man whose authority was failing him. Within a week of the fire, Peel began selling what he called Peel's patent snow paint from his store counter. It was not limewash. It was ground chalk, plain caliche powder, mixed with water and a splash of linseed oil he had bought from a freight shipment. No burned lime, no slaking, no salt brine, no cassin, no waiting between coats. A man could buy a bucket for $2, brush it onto a wall, and call himself protected. Malon heard about it from Orville, who had been in the store when Peel demonstrated the mixture on a board. It went on white, Orville said. Bright white, looked just like yours. It is not like mine. I know, but it looks like it. Malon went to the store. He did not confront Peel. He brought 2 boards, one coated with Peel's chalk paint, one with proper limewash. He set them on the porch rail in full sun and told Emmett Shoals, who was sitting outside whittling, to touch both at 3 o'clock. He left and did not return. But Shoals touched both boards at 3 o'clock, and the chalkboard was hot and the limewash board was not, and Shoals told the story to every man who came into the store for the next week. The chalk paint failed in the field within days. A ranch cook, Sigurd, the same Emmett Shoals who had originally come to Malin's cabin, had bought 2 buckets and coated the bunkhouse west wall. The first wind stripped the coating to bare wood. Shoals cursed Peel publicly on the store porch, using language that made Pancoast wince from 50 yards away. "Your snow paint is flour paste," Shoals said. "It powdered off in one blow. The wall is bare, and I am out $4. Peels said the application was wrong. Scholes said the product was wrong. 3 men standing nearby said nothing, but their silence was its own verdict. The damage was not just to Peel's pocket, it was to the idea. Every failure of the fake paint made people doubt the real limewash. If white coating could not be trusted, why bother? Mullen felt the danger of this more acutely than any threat Peel had made to his claim. A method that worked could be destroyed not by opposition but by bad imitation, by someone who copied the color without understanding the chemistry, who sold the appearance without delivering the function. He said as much to Celia that evening, standing beside the meeting house where the 4th coat was drying. "You cannot stop him from selling chalk water," Celia said. "I do not need to stop him. I need to make the difference visible. People will choose the method that works if they can see it work and see the other fail." "Then we need more walls," Celia said. "Not 1 meeting house, 10 buildings, 20. Every surface the community can compare." She was already planning. Her handbill sat the plain language instruction sheet she had been writing since August Dyer's was nearly finished. It listed the materials, the ratios, the steps, the warnings. It said burned lime in large letters at the top and not chalk dust below it. It said 5 thin coats, not 1 thick. It said weight between each coat. Mullen read it and added 1 line at the bottom in his own hand. Learned from Tomas Arrieta, Calero, New Mexico. It was the only monument the man would ever have, but it traveled farther than stone. By October of 1885, the meeting house west wall stood at 5 coats and the south wall at 4, and Isaac Pancoast had moved the Sunday meeting to the afternoon so the elders could sit against the treated walls during the hottest hours and feel the difference in their backs. It was not a dramatic difference. The meeting house was still warm, the plains were still brutal, but the elders who had spent 3 summers pressing their shoulder blades against dark planks that radiated stored heat now pressed them against white lime surfaces that did not. And the difference was enough that a 2-hour meeting no longer ended with 3 people dizzy and 1 carried outside. Pancoast did not make speeches about it. He simply scheduled the meeting later in the day and let the walls speak. When a newcomer asked why the west side was white and the east side was dark, Pancoast said, "Put your hand on both and you will have your answer." The teaching began in earnest. Mullen set up a demonstration at the meeting house every Saturday morning through October. He did not lecture, he made people touch things. 2 boards on the porch rail, 1 dark, 1 lime-washed, both in full sun since dawn. Touch the dark one, now touch the white one. That was the argument. No words required. Then the process, shown through action. He cracked caliche nodules with Tomas's hammer, letting the sharp ring of steel on stone draw attention the way a preacher's voice draws attention, by being the only clear sound in an open space. He sorted the nodules by weight and color, discarding the brown clay pieces, keeping the pale, heavy ones. He showed the burn pit, the draft channel, the layered fuel. He did not light a burn during the demonstration because a proper burn took 6 hours, and an audience would not sit for 6 hours, but he showed the cold pit and the finished product, white powder in a tin A. And he let Emmett Scholes feel the difference between unburned caliche and burned lime by dropping a pinch of each into a cup of vinegar. The unburned caliche sat in the vinegar like sand. The burned lime fizzed and popped and gave off heat that Scholes could feel through the tin cup. "That is the difference," Mullen said. "The fire changes the stone. Without the fire, you are painting with mud." He showed the slake. He added lime to water in a barrel, slowly, with Clara standing beside him, repeating the warning, "Lime to water, never water to lime. Stand back when it hisses." The barrel steamed. The crowd stepped back. Clara did not step back, because she had done this 40 times and knew the sound of a good slake from the sound of a bad one. A steady hiss meant the lime was drinking evenly. A sudden roar meant too much lime had been added, and the barrel could spit. He showed the binder. Salt dissolved in water until it tasted like tears. Sour milk poured in until the mixture smelled sharp. Chalk dust added for body, stirred until it ran like cream off the brush. He showed the application. Dampen the wood first. Brush the first coat thin enough to see grain through the white. Let it dry. Wait. Dampen again. Second coat. Wait. Third coat. Wait. 5 coats for a roof, 3 for a wall. And between each coat, the waiting that Tomas had said was the real craft. How long between coats? Orville asked. 1 full day in summer, 2 in fall, 3 in winter if the air's damp. 3 days between coats? That is a week and a half for a wall. That is why it works. The lime carbonates between coats. It turns back into stone. If you paint wet on wet, you trap water inside and the whole thing lifts in the first wind. Peel's chalk paint failed because it had no lime and no weighting. Even proper lime fails without weighting. Orville looked at the meeting house wall. He ran his knuckle across it and heard the hard mineral ring that Tomas had taught Mahlon to listen for. It sounds like rock, Orville said. It is rock, limestone, 1 coat thick, bonded to the wood, 5 layers of rock on the roof, 3 on each wall. It is not paint, it is armor. That word, armor, traveled through the settlement the way Ghost House had traveled, but in the opposite direction. Ghost House had been a dismissal. Armor was a claim, and the claim could be tested by anyone with 2 hands and 2 boards in the sun. The adoption spread through the vulnerable structures first, because vulnerability was the best teacher. Orville's milk shed received 3 coats in 1 week. Linnet's goat pen received 2 coats on the shade boards. The school's west wall, the side that had nearly caught during the fire, received 4 coats, and Celia supervised the application herself, measuring temperatures before and after with the same thermometer that had recorded the crisis. Dorothea Plunkett's son Virgil coated his mother's wagon cover with a thin lime wash mixed heavier on the milk for flexibility. The canvas did not hold the lime as well as wood. It cracked along fold lines. But the temperature underneath dropped enough that Dorothea could sit in the wagon at noon without the canvas radiating heat downward onto her head. Emmett Scholes coated the new chicken coop he had built to replace the one lost in the fire. He applied 6 coats to the roof because he had lost 23 birds in the old dark coop, and he was not going to lose them again. The chickens laid better through October than they had laid all summer, and Scholes told everyone he met that the birds were calmer, which may or may not have been true, but which made for a good story at the store. 2 families who had arrived from East Texas in September drawn by the school land prices that had pulled Abel Vickery west 2 years before, came to Mahlon before they built. They asked where to orient their cabins, how to vent their roofs, what wood to use, and how much lime they would need. Mahlon drew plans in the dirt with a stick, the way Tomas had drawn the burn pit. He charged nothing. "You could charge," Celia said. "Tomas did not charge me." "Tomas had 30 years of skill. You have the lime hammer and 6 months of practice. If I charge, men will skip the process to save money. They will buy Peel's chalk water because it costs less and looks the same. The method only spreads if it is free, and it only works if people learn the weighting." Celia did not agree entirely. She believed knowledge had value and that Mahlon underestimated his own. But she understood his logic and did not press the point. Instead, she finished the handbill and copied it 12 times by hand, each copy precise, each one carrying Tomas's name at the bottom. She distributed the handbills through the school. Every child took one home. Every parent who read it now had the ratios, the warnings, and the steps. Burned lime, not chalk dust. 5 thin coats, not 1 thick. Weight between each coat. Learned from Tomas Arrieta, Calero, New Mexico. Clara became the keeper of ratios in person. When settlers came to the meeting house demonstration, she stood beside the barrel and recited, "Burned lime first, water slow, salt after, milk when cool, thin as cream, wait 1 day." She was 11 years old, and she spoke with the flat certainty of a child who had measured the difference between life and death with a borrowed thermometer and a school slate. Ned became the keeper of the slaking barrel. He had a feel for it that Mahlon envied. The boy could tell by the pitch of the hiss whether the lime was drinking at the right rate, and he pulled his hand back a half second before a spit. Every time, as if the barrel spoke to him in a language only 6-year-olds could hear. Malin watched his brother's children teach strangers the method that had saved their lives, and he thought of Tomas saying, "Teach the girl the ratios. If you die or collapse, she will be able to tell whoever finds you how to mix the batch." The old man had not been planning for Malin's death. He had been planning for the knowledge to survive beyond any single person. The method was not Malin's. It was not Tomas's. It belonged to whoever learned it properly and passed it on. Ransom Peel's final conversion came in November. The autumn had not been kind to him. His fake paint had cost him credibility. Shoal's public cursing on the store porch had become a story that men repeated when they wanted to warn each other about shortcuts. 2 ranch outfits had shifted their supply orders to a competing store in a settlement 20 miles north, not because of the paint specifically, but because the paint had confirmed a suspicion they had carried for years, that Peel sold appearance and called it substance. His storehouse roof had become a problem. The dark plank ceiling held summer heat so thoroughly that goods spoiled faster inside the store than outside it. Flour caked, salt clumped, tallow softened and ran. Customers who had once lingered at the counter through the hot months now bought quickly and left because standing inside Peel's store felt like standing inside an oven, and standing inside an oven to buy supplies from a man who sold fake whitewash felt like a punishment they had not earned. Peel had tried to fix the problem himself. He had bought 2 sacks of commercial lime from a freight shipment at 3 times what Malin had spent on caliche and salt combined. He had mixed the lime with water and brushed it onto the storehouse roof in 1 thick coat, the way a man paints a fence, fast, heavy, and impatient. The coat blistered within a week. The thick application had trapped moisture against the planks, and when the moisture dried, it pushed the lime away in bubbles that popped and powdered. Within 2 weeks, the roof was worse than before. Pale flakes on dark wood, like a skin disease, holding neither heat nor cold, but looking like failure made visible from 100 yards. He came to Malin's cabin at dawn on a Tuesday. He brought the 2 sacks of lime and nothing else. No horse. He had walked, which meant he did not want to be seen. No ledger, no debt papers, no watch chain. Just a man carrying 2 sacks of something he did not know how to use. Mahlon was at the burn pit, cracking nodules for a batch he had promised to the new East Texas families. He heard Peel's boots on the caliche and looked up. Peel set the sacks on the ground. He did not sit. He stood with his hands at his sides and his face carrying the expression of a man who had rehearsed words and now could not say them. "Tell me what I skipped," he said. Malin set down the lime hammer. "Everything." "Then tell me everything." "Sit down." Peel sat on the ground. He sat in the white dust of the chalk skirt, and his trousers picked up the powder, and he did not brush it off. Malin sat across from him. "You skipped the burn," Malin said. "Commercial lime in a sack may have been burned properly, or it may have been burned too cool, or it may have been slaked and re-dried, which kills the bond. You cannot trust a sack. You must burn your own stone and know the fire was right. Peel nodded. You skip the slake. You mix lime and water fast. The lime must sit in water for a day. It must drink slowly. Fast slaking gives you lumps that will never smooth, and lumps in the mix leave gaps in the coat. Peel nodded. You skip the binder. No salt, no milk. The lime needs salt to harden and milk to grip. Without binder, it is powder on wood. I did not know about the milk. Sour milk, not fresh. The sourer the better. Why? Because the sour is the part that sticks. Tomas called it caseinas. The protein in the milk curdles and becomes glue when it meets the lime. Fresh milk has less of it. Peel looked at the white cabin. He had been inside it during the worst heat of his life. He had felt the air that was 18 degrees cooler than the air outside. He had watched Clara put wet rags on his wrists with the steady hands of a child who had practiced on her brother first. And the coats, he said, thin, 5 for a roof, 3 for a wall, 1 day between each. You applied 1 thick coat. 1 thick coat traps water. Water expands. The coat lifts. You painted a blister onto your roof. Peel was quiet for a long time. The morning sun was climbing, and the white cabin behind Mahlan was beginning to throw its daily glare, the south wall bright enough to make a man squint from the fence line. I told people your method was luck, Peel said. I know. I sold chalk dust and called it your method. I know that too. Scholes lost $4.23 chickens in the dark coop because he trusted my paint instead of your lime. Scholes has a new coop now, 6 coats. The chickens are fine. Peel stood. He picked up the 2 sacks of lime. I will scrape my roof myself. I will burn my own stone. I will slake and mix and apply thin coats and wait between each one. You will tell me if I am doing it wrong. Bring your scraper to the meeting house Saturday. You will start by removing your own failed coat in front of the people who bought your paint. Peel's face tightened. Public scraping, public admission, not a speech of apology, maum, labor. The hardest kind of conversion. Not saying he was wrong, but showing it, with a tool in his hand and an audience he had lied to watching every stroke. He walked north toward Estacado carrying the 2 sacks. Malin watched him go and felt something that was not satisfaction and not forgiveness, but something in between. The recognition that a man who walks 2 miles in the dark carrying lime he does not know how to use is a man who has finally stopped pretending. On Saturday, Ransom Peel scraped his own failed coat from the storehouse roof, while Emmett Scholes, Orville Keck, Isaac Pancoast, Celia Bostwick, and 14 settlers watched. The white flakes came off in sheets, revealing dark wood that was already warm at 9 in the morning. Peel scraped for 3 hours. He did not speak. When he finished, Malin handed him a bucket of proper lime wash and a dampened rag and said, "Wet the wood first." Peel wet the wood. He applied the first thin coat under Mahlone's eye. He did not rush. He did not pile it thick. He brushed it on the way cream runs off a spoon, thin even, letting the grain show through. "Now wait," Mahlon said. "Until tomorrow?" "Until tomorrow." Peel climbed down from the roof and stood among the people he had sold fake paint to. Nobody said anything. Nobody needed to. The scraping had been the speech, and the first thin coat had been the apology, and the waiting, the long day of doing nothing while the lime carbonated, was the penance. Tomas would have approved. The courtship between Malin Vickery and Celia Ann Bostwick did not look like courtship. It looked like work. They coated walls together. They mixed batches. They stood on opposite sides of a meeting house door frame, each applying lime with a brush. and their conversation was about ratios and cure times and whether the north wall needed 3 coats or 4. They walked the settlement after supper, checking drying progress on roofs and shutters, and their evening talks were about which families had applied correctly and which had rushed and would need to redo their second coat. Celia brought her thermometer and her handbills. Mullen brought the lime hammer and a bucket. They were not romantic figures. They were two people who had found something worth doing and found each other while doing it, and the bond between them was built the way a lime coat is built, one layer at a time with patience until it rang when you knocked on it. Celia insisted that women learn the method, not as helpers, as practitioners. She pointed out that women and children spent more hours inside cabins than men did, that women managed the cooking and the sick room and the nursery, and that any method meant to make the inside of a house livable should be controlled by the people who lived inside it most. She taught Lynette Keck to mix the binder. She taught Dorothea Plunkett to test lime with vinegar. She taught the East Texas wives to dampen wood before coating and to feel the difference between a coat that had cured, hard, ringing, and a coat that had not, soft, thudding. Mullen watched her teach and saw something Tomas had given him reflected back in a different voice. The insistence that knowledge without patience was dangerous, that shortcuts killed, and that the person who learned the waiting was the person who owned the craft. They married in the meeting house the following spring, after its roof was fully whitened, 5 coats on every slope, the ridge vent built into the lime line so that hot air could escape without the gap clogging. Pancoast performed the ceremony. Clara stood beside Celia with a bouquet of dried prairie flowers. Ned held the rings in a tin cup he had whitewashed for the occasion. Orville and Lynette sat in the front row with their infant, who was fat and calm and had spent the hottest months of her first year in a cabin with 3 coats on the roof. Ransom Peel attended. He sat in the back, near the south wall, and leaned against the 5 coats of lime that he had helped apply after scraping his own failure from his own roof. He did not smile, but he did not leave. The years after moved the way years move on the plains, in seasons, not events. By the summer of 1886, the whitewash had a name. Settlers called it Vickery Wash, though Mullen corrected them when he could. Arietta Wash, he said. I carried hods. Tomas knew the craft. The correction rarely held. Names attached to the person you can see, not the person who taught them. The settlement set 1 week before high summer as White Week. Roofs, shutters, barrel lids, school walls, sick room windows, and chicken coops. Every surface that faced the sun received a fresh coat during that week. The ritual had the quality of a barn raising, communal labor, shared materials, women mixing while men climbed, children carrying buckets, the smell of lime and sour milk filling the air like a season of its own. Mahlon and Celia raised Clara and Ned alongside 2 children of their own, a boy named Abel, after Mahlon's brother, and a girl named Ragna, after Celia's mother. The cabin expanded over the years. A second room, a proper kitchen with a ventilated roof, a covered porch on the south side where the white wall threw shade cool enough to sit in through July. The original 14 by 18 room remained the core, its walls now carrying 8 years of lime coats, each one bonded to the last, the surface so thick and hard that Mahlon could not drive a nail without first chipping through a 1/4 inch of stone. Clara became a teacher. She finished her schooling under Celia, earned a certificate by examination in Lubbock, and returned to Estacado to teach in the same one-room school where Celia had posted the first temperature slate. She kept the 3 test boards, dark, chalk, lime, on a shelf above her desk, and every September, on the first day of school, she set them in the sun and told her students to touch each one. The dartboard was the first lesson of the year. The lime board was the last thing they remembered. Ned became a freighter, like Orville. He ran a route between Estacado and Colorado City, hauling supplies west and empty barrels east. Every May, before the heat arrived, he painted his wagon top white. Not chalk, not store-bought paint. Proper limewash mixed from burned caliche, slaked with patience, bound with salt and sour milk. His wagon was the only white-topped rig on the route, and freighters who rode beside him in July noticed that Ned's load spoiled less, and Ned himself finished the day less beaten than men under dark canvas. Mullen's hands never fully recovered. The lime burns left the skin on his knuckles pale and tight, and 2 fingernails grew ridged and yellow for the rest of his life. He wore the damage without complaint. It was the same damage Tomas had carried, the Calero's mark, the evidence that a man had worked with material that could hurt him and had kept working because the hurt was smaller than what it prevented. He was never wealthy. The claim produced enough. Celia's teaching salary provided steadiness. The limewash could not be sold because Mullen refused to sell it. He gave the knowledge away Saturday after Saturday, year after year, cracking nodules with Tomas's hammer and saying the same words Clara had memorized at 11. Burned lime first, water slow, salt after, milk when cool. In 1902, a man from the State Agricultural Office visited the South Plains to study construction methods in drought regions. He examined Mullen's cabin and measured the lime coat at 3/8 of an inch on the south wall, 17 years of annual coats, each one a thin layer of limestone bonded to the last. He wrote in his report that the method was sound, the physics well established, and the application ingenious for a region without access to commercial building materials. Mullen read the report and said, "He spelled Tomas's name wrong." Celia corrected the spelling in a letter to the agricultural office. They corrected it in the next printing. In 1914, Mullen was 63 years old, and he sat outside the white cabin on a chair Ned had freighted from Lubbock. The chair had a limewash seat because Celia had coated every flat surface within reach, including the outhouse door, the chicken run gate, and the mailbox post, and Mullen had long since stopped questioning which surfaces needed lime, and which were simply within range of her brush. The cabin was the same cabin, 14 by 18 feet at its core, with additions spreading east and south, all of them white. The original south wall now carried 29 coats of lime, nearly half an inch of mineral shell, and when Mullen knocked on it with his scarred knuckle, it rang like a church bell made of chalk. Clara's students were coating a roof on the new claim east of the property. 2 boys stood on ladders while Clara, 39 now, precise as Celia had been, carrying a thermometer in her apron pocket, the way other women carried peppermints, supervised from below. She did not let them rush. She did not let them apply thick. She made them wait. A rider came along the road from the south, young, dusty, probably from one of the new oil lease outfits that were starting to punch holes in the Permian Basin. He slowed his horse when the cabin came into view. Mullen watched him shade his eyes. The glare off the roof was still strong enough at noon to make a man squint from a quarter mile, the same glare that had spooked horses in 1885, the same impossible white that had made cowboys laugh, and Ransom Peale coin a phrase that followed Mullen for 30 years. "What is that?" the rider called to Clara. "Limewash," Clara said. "It keeps the heat out." The rider looked at the roof and the walls and the white ground skirt and the whitewashed barrel boards and the chair where the old man sat with scarred hands and a lime hammer across his knees. "Looks like a ghost house," the rider said. Mullen laughed. It was the first time he had ever laughed at the phrase, not because it was funny, because it had taken 29 years to become a thing he could hold in his hands without it cutting. the way lime becomes stone when you give it enough time. The rider tipped his hat and rode on. He did not stop. He did not